Happy birthday to WizNugs. We're celebrating 1 year of the WizNugs podcast. We're going to try something a little different today. And instead of doing something that's specifically self-help and mentorship, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our maybe more nerdy hobbies.
I was going to say, we're going to let our inner nerd shine through.
Welcome back to WizNugs. Specifically, the nerdiness that we want to delve into today. We're going to talk Star Wars and maybe a new way of thinking about Star Wars that you haven't thought of before.
So what were you thinking about in general?
A while back, I found this website that talked about a different order for watching the Star Wars movies.
Okay, what was the purpose of that?
Well, so just to go back a step here,
Okay.
Typically, there's two different ways of thinking about Star Wars movies.
Okay.
We've got release order, which is 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3. And that's the way that we were introduced to the movies because that's the order in which they were released in theaters.
Right.
Then there are other people who say, no. The internal chronology of the movies starts with episode 1, and you get to see Anakin, and you get to see him grow up, and you get to see his fall into Darth Vader-ness, and then you see Luke, and it just picks up the story chronologically.
Right. And so I remember an interview with George Lucas when he was talking about this has always been a story about the rise and fall and redemption
Of Anakin Skywalker. Yeah. So this is a different way of thinking about it that this guy came up with. I do not claim any ownership over this. He referred to it as the Machete Order, specifically because the blog was something along the lines of absolutely no machete juggling. I'll find the link and I'll put it in the description.
I was going to ask, where the heck does Machete come into it? Because has he not seen the movies? They use lightsabers.
It's to do with the name of his blog.
Okay.
And so in a way, it's kind of like an homage to the guy who really instantiated this whole concept.
Okay.
So each of those orders has problems. So if you're a Star Wars fan and you've seen them before, you get it. So spoiler warning, we're going to be digging deep into Star Wars, okay? If you don't want to see that, maybe this isn't the video for you. But if you're in for it, buckle up.
We're going to hope that the majority of you have seen the movies and will know what we're talking about. But if you feel at any point in time that we're giving information that you're not aware of because you have not seen it, please go ahead and, against our bitter wishes, refrain from watching the video.
I believe George Lucas is on record as saying the proper order to watch is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or what the Star Wars fandom calls chronological order.
Okay.
The problem with that is that when we see Anakin grow up and become Darth Vader, and then at the end of episode 3, you see the babies being born, you know that Anakin is Luke's father, and you know that he's also Leia's father, and you know that Luke and Leia are brother and sister. So when you get to episode 4 and he's thinking, hey, maybe I got a shot with this princess, it's creepy. And when Darth Vader says, no, I am your father, and he's, no, that's impossible, that surprise is ruined because you already know that that's just the case, and it's just Luke hasn't seen it yet. So what this does, this Machete Order, it starts you off with episode 4, which is how we all started off, and arguably it's the best introduction to the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. Because you start off with Luke Skywalker is kind of an everyman. He's just some guy. He's a farm boy on some remote planet, and he doesn't know anything about anything.
Yeah.
He's thrust into this story when the droids go missing. And he has to go search for him, and then he ends up meeting Obi-Wan and kind of going through, and he goes, no, I really need to stay with my aunt and uncle. They've taken care of me my whole life. I really need to stay with them. And he comes back, and they're gone. And so he is forced into this, whether he wants to or not. Mm-hmm. And through his eyes and through his experience, we learn about the Force, we learn about the Empire, we learn about the Rebellion. All of these things come to us for the first time through Luke's eyes, and it's a really great entry into that universe.
And there's a lot of things, the way that it's presented, it's very black and white, right? We're good guys, they're bad guys. There's no nuance here.
Well, ultimately, it's been described as a fairy tale.
Right.
Because if you think about it, The farm boy goes off with the old wizard to rescue the princess from the Dark Lord.
Now,
And they specifically, literally use those words in the first movie, episode 4.
and if I can recall correctly, this is based off the hero's story, right? The hero's adventure.
Hero's journey.
Thank you. I could not remember, but anyway, continue.
If you start the way that George Lucas says with episode 1, you end up with Anakin, who's a child, and you have Obi-Wan, who's a teenager, but he's a Jedi Knight, or at least in training.
Right.
And you have Qui-Gon, who is a Jedi Master, and then you've got the Queen, Amidala, and there's nobody really to attach yourself to in this situation.
Right.
Because you know that the kid is going to be Darth Vader. If you've seen I guess maybe if you haven't seen the movies before, you don't know that.
Right.
But still, you're in this situation where it's like, which one of these is my guy? You know? You don't know who to latch onto and whose viewpoint is going to be they're all interesting. They're all weird. They're all skewed for one reason or another. And not quite as strong as Luke's entry into this world.
I think we gained the attachment to the characters because of the way that 4 was done, right? I can tell you, because I've seen all of them, I could tell you that I feel more attached to the characters or I feel like I have some skin in the game, if you would, starting from 4 and then going back and revisiting and then watching 1, 2, and 3 because I know the story. Even if I do know what the outcome is, I still feel like, okay, well then now let me see how did he get to that point? What led him to that point?
Right. So if you watch in the release order, you get to see the story the way that we all did in the early days,
right?
Where you see Luke Skywalker's training and his rise through becoming a Jedi, and you see that he is ultimately able to redeem his father. And then you go and watch, wait a minute, there's more that'll tell you about Anakin and his life. Cool. And you learn about those things, and you kind of go through Anakin's story from childhood up to becoming, ultimately falling to the dark side, becoming Darth Vader.
Right.
It's not bad, but it's not as strong as it otherwise could be. And so that's where Machete Order comes in.
Okay.
Machete Order ultimately says you start with episodes 4 and 5, which is A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. Mm-hmm. You get 2 movies of Luke's story, it's a great entry point in. Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, famously ends on a cliffhanger with Han Solo being just taken away.
Right.
And everyone's kind of separated and scattered. What's going to happen? Where do we go from here?
Right.
Then, at the end of episode 5, I believe, is when you have that big moment where Luke finds out that Darth Vader is his father.
Right.
But he doesn't want to believe it. He says that's impossible, or he screams it. And then jump back and you get episodes 2 and 3. You see 2 movies of Anakin's story. Now, part of the reason why you want to kind of leave out 1, this is where it gets a little bit more technical, or, there's some nuance here. You start off with Anakin is about at the same age as Luke is when you first meet him in episode 4.
Right.
So right away, you've got parallels where you can see the father and son's journey. Mm-hmm. Also, Hayden Christensen's Anakin's a little bit on the whiny side.
Yes.
I don't know, Master. I don't really want to go over there. Okay, I guess we'll go. And when you first meet Luke in episode 4, he's like, oh, I was going to go into Tashi Station for power converters.
Yeah. So on that note, I didn't want to intrude, but on that note, Luke's character is a little bit of that whiny kid, right? And I've seen spin-offs and what's the word? Parodies of it through different organizations and stuff, as him being like overly whiny. Now, when you all watch the movie, he's not really that bad, but you do get that sense, right? And Hayden Christensen's performance, because I, as an individual, my subjective view on it was like, I expect Anakin to be this awesome, top-notch fighter who's like no nonsense, and you get this performance again. I don't blame Hayden. I probably blame the director on this. He gets like this character that like, I wanted something that was more formidable, if you would. Something that was going to be more of a presence, not like, oh, Master. To me, it just like, ugh. I didn't want the milquetoast Anakin.
So I think in this case, like that performance being what it is,
yeah,
I think what you end up with that's positive here by leaving one out. You do 4 and 5, so you really get invested with the characters. You go back and you see basically the flashback.
Yeah.
Okay, so it ends with the cliffhanger of I'm your father and Han's gone and what are we going to do? And then you go and pick up and you see 2 and 3 and you see how Anakin became Darth. You find out the romance between Anakin and Padme is a lot less creepy if you see them as being, more or less the same age.
Right.
They're both, grown up-ish. Whereas when you see episode 1, Anakin's a child and she's like an older teenager, it's like, that's weird.
How old is he? He was like 9 years old or something like that?
I don't remember specifically, but just seeing him as a child.
Yeah.
And him going, are you an angel? It's very much like babysitter vibes. Like,
again, I'm not trying to go off on tangents, but yeah, some of the words and some of the things in the first movie with the way that the kid portrayed the character, I realized he was a child. Okay.
And I'm sure that's exactly what George Lucas was looking for. Like, I don't want to blame the actor for it at all.
Yeah.
I've got no hate for any of these people involved. Simply to say, it's a little bit more confusing and not quite as strong as it could be.
Right.
And that's where cutting out 1 makes the tight story that much tighter. Mm-hmm. Also, you end up with Luke gets trained by Obi-Wan. That's how Obi-Wan is introduced to the Force.
Yep.
There's no Qui-Gon. You end up with, skipping right to number 2 instead of 1, that Obi-Wan is training Anakin. Mm-hmm. And you get to see them fighting together in the Clone Wars. Well, one of the first things that he says to him about Anakin in episode 4 is, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. He was one of the best pilots. He was a cunning warrior, all of this. Well, now you get to see it. Episode 2 jumps right into that. There's nothing about pod races or trade embargoes or blockades and politics. It jumps right into war and action, which is what Star Wars is all about, really.
Right.
By then seeing episodes 2 and 3, you get this flashback and you get to see teenage Anakin being trained by Obi-Wan, falling to the dark side.
Yep.
And by the end, he's killed younglings and he's done his whole thing. And then you get to see, it does sort of spoil the surprise that you get otherwise in episode 6 of them being twins. That, if Luke fails, we're lost. And Yoda says, no, there's another. It just pushes that from 6 forward a little bit to 3, which is the last movie you watched before 6 in Machete Order.
Yep.
So you've done 4, 5, you flash back to 2 and 3, and now when episode 6 starts off, okay, if you watch release order 4, 5, 6, you get Luke not really being all that convincing when you first see him in episode 6, as maybe, Yoda's been warning him, if you leave now, your training's not finished, this is dangerous, the bad things are going to happen, you're too impatient, and if you follow your emotions, that's a path to the dark side.
Right.
Okay, but come on, he's Luke. We've seen Luke Skywalker go through all of his adventures thus far, and he's that optimistic, plucky guy who can get you through.
Right.
If you watch 2 and 3 in between 5 and 6, you get to see how Anakin turned because of people that he cared about. That he was just trying to protect the woman that he loves and his unborn children. That's his motivation for turning to the dark side. Then when you see episode 6, the very beginning of it, Luke comes in, you don't hear him, he doesn't say anything. He's wearing all black, and the first thing he does is force choke one of Jabba's guards.
Yep.
Now, so far, the only force choking we've ever seen is
Darth Vader. Yep.
bad guys doing that. So now he comes in and he's force choking wearing the all black, and he comes in and he seems like he's just deadpan. No, these droids are a gift. You can have them because I'm going to have that guy because I want him. And you start to learn the setup, and then, it only lasts for a little bit before the ruse is blown. But you get to see that maybe there's a shot that he could have turned to the dark side for this. It makes the story stronger to insert 2 and 3 there in between. I think it's a really tight way of telling the story. I think seeing the 2 movies of Luke, the 2 movies of Anakin, and then 1 movie of the 2 of them together where Luke says, I'm not giving up on you. And ultimately, it's his attachments to the people around him that end up making him stronger as a hero.
Now, I can't remember at the end of 3, when they show that the babies have been born, do they actually say their names at that point in time?
Yep.
Okay, so then you really do have that meshing together of the storyline. You have I'm your father at the end of 5.
That's impossible.
And then you see, like, well, that can't be true. It's impossible. And then it goes back and you see at the end of 3, the children being born and they give their names. And you're like, okay, yeah, I guess he is. And in the end of, at the end of 3, you see, Anakin getting fitted with the intentionally outdated equipment.
1970s style, yeah.
And I've done a little bit of research on this, and it was the Emperor intentionally gave him outdated equipment.
Oh.
Because he wanted to become stronger through the pain. He could have gotten more up-to-date technical robotics added, which would have nullified the pain. But the Emperor didn't want him to have that. He wanted him to be in constant pain all the time because that was going to make him stronger in the dark side of the Force.
Ultimately, if you watch release order or chronological order, that's okay. It's all right. But the story is not quite as tight and compelling as if you watch Machete Order.
And now knowing about it, I can replay it in my mind, right? And say, yep, no, that makes total sense. And again, not that one was that bad of a movie, but I don't feel that it really does lend itself to the overall story in it as a whole.
One common complaint about the Machete Order is that you just gonna jettison episode 1 completely. And that's not really the point. The point is, if you watch the movies in the Machete Order, you're going to get a nice, tight storyline where the parallels between father and son are bigger, bolder, and then you get to see the redemption of Anakin at the end.
Right.
And that's one complete story that's satisfying and compelling. Then you go watch episode 1 separately to get more information about that and have fun with the pod race and Jar Jar's silly antics and go with it. Go watch Star Wars Rogue One. Find out more about how the plans came to be in their possession and that the spies that died to get the plans and all. It's interesting, right? Go watch Solo and find out about the Kessel Run and the history of Lando and Han. It's interesting stuff and it's fun to watch. But I don't think that it's part of the tight Skywalker story.
Which was the origination of this universe, if you would.
And I think even 7, 8, and 9, they're good movies in their own way, but they're not part of that tight Skywalker storyline.
Right.
The redemption of Anakin at the end and the Emperor going down the, I don't know, down the well,
shaft.
down the well, I want to say.
Yeah.
It's closure, and you feel satisfied at the end of it.
Right.
And there's something about 7, 8, and 9 that maybe takes away some of that satisfaction with bringing the Emperor back. And Luke did some bad things because he just wasn't sure anymore. Like, there's a lot of ambiguity added.
Sure. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, and I realize this is a tangent, in 7, 8, 9, you have Luke like, oh, he was going to kill, this innocent kid because he saw some evil in him. And Luke being the like, oh, I saw a little bit of evil in this guy, and now I'm going to kill him. He just redeemed his father, who had about this much good left in him, but it was just enough to get the wedge in there to be able to redeem his father. He's going to give up on his technically nephew, right? Not even technically, really his nephew.
Right. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there were so many problems, and again, I'm not. We're not here to bash on 7, 8, 9.
If people enjoy the movies, great. Enjoy the movies. Don't let this commentary change that.
Right.
I also want to throw in here, there's a couple of other movies that you can watch in the Star Wars universe from the 1980s. The
Which
Ewoks
ones?
Battle for Endor
yes.
was one of my favorites as a kid. Before there was any prequel trilogy, we got that one on VHS and we watched it over and over again.
I forgot about that movie.
It's a really interesting little story.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with this big galactic plot or these giant wars in the stars. Yeah. No, it's a really small story about a girl who gets lost and then the Ewoks help her. Like, it's great. It's nice.
It's not necessarily anything to do with the actual storyline or the main storyline, But it's still interesting. It's still within that universe.
So enjoy Star Wars however you want to enjoy Star Wars. But if we're talking about the Skywalker Saga, I have to say, try out the Machete Order. It's really cool. It's really tight story. It's my favorite.
And as a side note, it's not actually part of the movie, but somebody went out there and they made the fight scene in A New Hope between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader so much more cooler than what you see in the original movie. I'm not taking anything away from the original movie.
We'll have to put the link in the description.
And I highly recommend it if you've not seen it. It is so well done, and it gives you a better feeling, especially after watching 2 and 3. Right? You see 2 and 3, and you say, these were what the Jedi were?
How fast the lightsaber battles are, and the skill of the warriors, and
all that. And then if you take that section, watch 4, but watch it after you get done watching 2 and 3, and before you go on to 6, right? Watch that little clip of this guy, what they did and what they to enhance the fight scene. It falls in line so well with the fighting style of the Jedi that this is what it should have been. Now, granted, the movie was made in 76, 77?
Well, there were some ideas, obviously. Like I've read, I've listened to interviews and read some stories about this, that ultimately George Lucas was saying that he expected that lightsabers had some weight to them. And so when they're fighting with them, it was like an older greatsword style fighting.
Okay.
And so it was intended to be like two-handed fighting.
Even though we didn't get that in 2 and 3 or even in 1.
And then in the prequels, it's all super fast because ultimately it's made of light. The blade is a light saber. So
yeah.
They changed their tune and made the fights more energetic. Along with all of these other things, there's some other stuff you might want to try out, like watching Rogue One right before watching Episode 4 is a really cool segue because it starts off right there. Like Leia's got some real moxie there at the beginning of Episode 4 to say, we're on a diplomatic mission. When you watch Rogue One right before, you learn Darth Vader literally followed that ship from where the plans were stolen. He knows the plans are there.
Yeah. So
her to come out with that bold-faced lie, standing there in front of this super powerful warrior, have some more respect for that.
Yeah. It was a good scene. I thought Rogue One was done really well. Not the biggest fan of Solo.
But, I mean, now we have all of the TV shows, too. Like, you want to watch the cartoons or the CG Clone Wars. All that stuff was really interesting. And the way that now feeds into the other shows, like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka.
I have not seen Ahsoka. I did watch Mandalorian, all 3 seasons of that so far.
And so there's a lot of entertainment to be had in this world. If you're a Star Wars fan, now's the time, right? There's a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah.
In all of your Star Wars enjoyment, on your next rewatch, maybe, try out the Machete Order.
Yeah, so that was the point of this particular episode, was to introduce you guys to the Machete Order. If you don't own the movies, I highly recommend you go out and get them. A lot of the older episodes, the 4, 5, and 6, have been remastered several times. So the graphics are now indicative of the same graphics that you see in 2 and 3.
We got Blu-ray quality out there. And there's this other weird thing you may have heard about called the despecialized editions, where someone painstakingly went through and took out all of the special edition editions that George Lucas made in the 90s. So there's a world of Star Wars out there to enjoy. This is our chance to share some of our nerddom with you. Let us know in the comments. Do you want to see more episodes where we talk about stuff like this too, intermingled with our other mentorship and life advice? Let us know how you feel.
Again, thanks for joining us on WizNugs, and we'll see you next time.